gonna do an intro for this, but I got writer's block and I couldn't come up with anything. I had a lot of anxiety about it. That's the opening to my favorite album. Actually, I was gonna record the introduction, but I had anxiety about it, and his producer's like, "What is it?" And he says it, and it's like 3 words, and the guy's like, "That's it." That's the beginning of the album.
So today, I guess as preface as any, we're talking about performance anxiety, finishing a project, and like writer's block, and those kinds of things that all seem to be related and feed into one another.
Well, I'm excited to be filming this video because I like the new angle much better. It looks much better than this.
Yeah.
Even though I don't think anybody actually watches it. I know one girl who watches it.
Oh, that's awesome. We have a fan.
Yeah.
One fan.
I've slept with a fan. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's
like,
pretty much my dream.
It's kind of like you're like a rock star and stuff. Living literally the rock star dream. It's like almost famous, only it's
Not even
like,
close.
Yeah.
That could be our almost famous, not even close.
Yeah.
So this is probably the video I'm least qualified to talk about because I've never really experienced writer's block. But this is going to be a general overview of all the things that prevent you from finishing a project, such as performance anxiety, writer's block. I don't know what else it would be. Oh, life. I want to talk about life getting in the way of writing and taking those priorities into account.
I have so much experience with all of these things.
Yeah, they're mostly foreign to me. I have performance anxiety like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Just ask the girl that watches our videos.
Yeah.
Okay, so I heard you got some questions.
I do. All right, first one. Since you don't have this, but at least I do, but what makes you anxious about getting started with the project? Is there anything that makes you, like, anxious about calming down, sitting down, and starting something? And if you do, how do you get past it?
Well, it's absolutely horrible. It's nightmarish. You're confronting your shadow self, which is like you at your lowest capability as a writer, I'll put it that way. Because you're sitting down, usually in a quiet room, to just write, to fill a blank page, you know? And it's all on you. You're building an entire universe, so to speak, with your words. Everything is you. When you're a director, you're responsible for the camera work, the characters, like the actor, the script, revisions, but you got like a crew of people helping you. It's very collaborative. When you're just writing a book, or even a script, which I'm doing now, but I think to a lesser extent, it's probably I'm not a good screenwriter, but I think writing scripts is just a ton of fun. Probably because I suck at it, so I'm not doing it right.
Art shouldn't be fun, Todd.
Yeah, exactly. So how I see it is like you're almost like stepping into the ring with your worst possible self, and it's hard to focus. It's hard to just do a good job because you're so anxious. And do you ask how I deal with that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm really bad at listening and following directions and answering questions are 2 things I'm very bad at. So how I overcome it is really funny. It's cringeworthy. I'm embarrassed to say this on the internet. So like, you know, like WWE wrestlers have entrance music.
Yes. Oh.
I listen to music, and usually very upbeat music, a lot of like pop music or rap or something, and just very, very happy music. It's not like necessarily even thematically relevant, and I hype myself up with that. I used to do that for hours before I'd write as a teenager. I'd pace a lot as well because I have more room in my room, and that's how I get over it, which is weird because you have to go from that, like adrenaline like 10, I exercise before I do it too usually, to like totally honed into a meditative state. But that's the only way I can do it.
So what's that song that amps you up to?
It really, really depends. I don't know. Right now, it's probably, I'm not doing much writing, but I'm gonna say right now it would probably be something Andrew WK. I'm not sure which song because there's a rotation of a few, but probably him. Do you have one?
Oh man. See, my process is a little bit different because I'll start with the music thing. I mostly just put on like some indie list that I come up with. Like usually depending on the project, I have like just this like.
Did you playlists?
I do. I have my own kind of playlist, mixtape kind of thing that I like to listen to. Like I have, and usually like depends on the project, like kind of how thematically I want to consider my book or something like that. Like I have Like on the current, like on my book I'm working on now, I have Built to Spill on there. I have Silverstein Pickups, Modest Mouse, like all these like random, very random artists. When now that I'm thinking and saying it out loud, but mostly I just listen to that to get me like into that mindset, sort of, right? Because my issue is whenever I try to sit down and write, I get myself so worked up and I get so like nervous and anxious because I think in some ways like working and stuff has kind of compromised my attention span because I'm used to like doing things so fast. Like they need stuff now, which, you know, and I love what I do. I absolutely love it, but I notice when I'm writing and stuff, I'm like, and you know, when you have like so many other things going on in your life and you're just like, oh, well, I gotta go do this on Thursday and I have this happening on next Monday and things like that. You just can't quiet your mind down enough to actually sit down and focus. Because I notice, you know, at least my best writing and the best work I do is when you slow down and actually spend time in the moment working on whatever you're doing. That's really what, to me, good writing is about. Or a good writing session for me is just being in that flow and in that zone. And I have such a hard time getting in that zone, and having that music and getting into that mindset just kind of, I say, in some ways just decompressing and just trying to turn all those thoughts off is just what helps me get started and get past that. And honestly, and so, this is going to sound terrible, but just telling myself, just don't be a pansy, just do it. Like, it's not that bad. And when I get into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, 6 hours later. Like, 6 hours later, I'm like, I'm really enjoying myself right now. And I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else. And I'm like, why did I get so worked up? And it's just a battle of shutting those thoughts off.
That's very much how it is for me. I think of, there's a quote in Rocky. I think it was in the first Creed movie specifically says it. It might have been an echo of an earlier statement in one of the earlier films, but he shows Adonis Creed. Is it Adonis? Yeah, because Apollo's the father. He shows Michael B. Jordan, Adonis Creed, the mirror, and he says, that guy in the mirror, that's your only enemy. That's how it feels for me with writing.
Yeah.
And it's very, very vulnerable. It's very like Stephen King. I'm going to bring up a few Stephen King things throughout this episode probably. He said that being caught writing is the same feeling of shame as being caught masturbating. And I've only ever been caught writing. But it is so like deer in the headlights, bewildered. Like I've been caught crying, and it's very similar in shame. Nothing even ashamed of writing, obviously. Like, yeah. I don't know, I got not bullied, but I got made fun of a lot for it back in high school. But I'm not ashamed of it or anything. It's just a part of who I am.
So I guess next is, what are your insecurities as a writer?
Oh, everything. It's funny. Well, I'm trying to think how to put it. Like I said, going back to it, you know, when I was younger, I wasn't praised for writing. There were people who thought it was cool, you know. Some family members were okay with it. I don't want to say I lost contact with a family member over it, but I definitely is kind of like, I'm not cutting them off or anything, but I haven't reached out to them, so we got into kind of an argument about my writing. It was fun. She asked me if I was still writing filth, and I was like, no, I'm writing stuff much worse than I used to write. She said, are you still writing filth like you used to? I said, no, much worse. Oh. I was writing a children's book at that point. I didn't tell her that because I just wanted to make her upset because she offended my honor or whatever. But I used to hide writing. I didn't tell people I was writing. I hid it actually in a crawl space. I hid all my writing in a crawl space when I was in high school.
Really?
And eventually in notebooks. Because I didn't have a laptop back then. It wasn't that way. I had one desktop computer, and that's all we needed. It's not as modern as things are today. And eventually my brother found it, and they were like scary stories, and I had pictures of limbs flying around and stuff. It looked like storyboards for How Zoo. And my brother found it. He got kind of freaked out. He's younger than I am. He still is younger than I am. And he showed my mom, and she was really against horror movies, against kind of music I liked, all that stuff. And, you know, she had to talk with me about it, and she just said about not being ashamed about it. And it reminds me of when I was in high school, I used to paint my nails sometimes. And it wasn't a serious thing. It was just kind of like, it happened once because some girl wanted to, and I really didn't care. And then it really pissed people off, so I continued to do it because I didn't understand why people cared. And I went out like that one time, and my mom said to me, she said, you know, if you do this, you know people are going to make fun of you or give you a hard time. And it wasn't, I don't want to misquote her. I'm going to make her sound bad because it wasn't this way. What she said was, if you're going to make a statement in your life or do something, you have to accept the consequences of it. You don't just get to be yourself free of charge, essentially. And I don't know, that stuck with me. But in terms of my actual writing, you know, my prose, I did first person for a long time where everything was an active character, more so than, you know, I really love A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I really like Clive Barker's prose. I like really, I don't like the word, everybody in college called it flowery. I don't like that term, but what people would consider flowery, I'm really into. I like James Joyce and stuff like that.
Like eloquent.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I like that. Baroque, maybe even. And I don't write that way at all. I'm very low art in that approach. And I write very, like, crass, crude characters, up until my current book, at least. So there's some insecurity there. I'm insecure because there's a lot of nastiness. There's characters who cheat on each other, who use drugs, who kill people, who, you know, are racist and sexist, and a lot of stuff that I hope that I'm not seen as. So, you know, putting anything out there like that's very scary. But, you know, I'm also scared that my books just suck. I'd say the highest rating I'd actually give any of my books, I used to review my own books just because I give so many movies bad reviews, so I started reviewing my own books for a little bit, but nobody cared except for me, so I stopped. I think the highest rating I give one of my own books at this point, probably, I'd say B- or B, is as high as I go for my best, after 11 or 12 years of writing. So there's a lot of insecurities.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'm a bundle full of insecurity on and off the page. This is great, yeah. But
I was kind of hoping not to cut you off,
Oh.
but I was kind of hoping you'd just be like, none.
I'm completely a confident person. I do everything right. I make no mistakes. And all right, video over. Just kidding. No, I'm kidding. I am so insecure about my writing. I think that's a lot of what held me up over the years, like especially with this current project I've been working on. Like outside of like letting life get in the way and stuff, I was so like insecure about my writing. I didn't like my style. I didn't like, you know, I guess just the way I was telling the story. I thought like I couldn't structure very well, and I thought my ideas were unoriginal, they're crap, and I'm like, I don't really care for this. And I'm like, because one of my favorite writers, actually my favorite writer is Robert Cormier, and I go on about this all the time, ad nauseum, but I'm always worried. I'm like, well, this isn't something that I'd be proud of, like I'm so influenced and so in love with like Robert Cormier's book. I'm like, I just want to write a book that makes, you know, it does this author proud, even though he is not around anymore and he has no idea who I am. But I write for you, Robert Cormier. but
He's waiting for you in Valhalla.
Yeah.
On Mount Olympus. He's there.
He is there with his books. Oh my gosh, yeah. But I just think like I'm so unoriginal, my prose is immature, and I get very hard on myself, down on myself, and I think, but then I fell into this comparison trap. I think that's really where the root of my insecurity is. And I compare my first draft to someone's finished product. And I do this all the time, and I'm trying to consciously make myself aware that I'm doing this. And it only didn't strike me until recently, and so I'm trying to get better about it, but also I think I just don't take myself as seriously as a writer, because I'm like, oh, I'm not as published as other people, so I'm not a real writer and stuff like that. And I had like someone make a comment to me recently about it, but
Well, how I feel about that. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Were you
you're
still
good.
going?
No, you're
Okay. How I feel about that is like, you know, I'm really into logical fallacies and stuff. I base my worldview around them. No, I'm really into like discovering them and finding them. They really shape the way that I use logic. Having like Plato and Socrates and all that. So they're the same thing basically. But going through like philosophy and debates and arguments and seeing that and deconstructing conversation, it led me to look into a lot of that stuff, which I was really obsessed with last year. And with that kind of thing, it's really an argument from authority, you know? It's just saying, oh, well, I'm better than you because this place said that I am.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's good. It's a great accomplishment to be published. I'm not putting down anybody who's published, but I'm also not going to put down anybody who wasn't. Look at all the famous authors who were never published in their lifetime. I was going to bring up H.P. Lovecraft a little bit ago, and he just had little minor magazine publications. What's her name? Oh Christ, she's one of the most famous. Is it Emily Dickinson?
Yeah.
That was never published in her life?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like what, was she shit? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is totally off topic, but on the concept of Mount Olympus for writers, I wonder, like, what does Heaven's Library look like? Like, on one hand, this is going to piss off two sets of people, but, so, like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, well, there's a Bible, that's all you need. I'm like, yeah, but I want to see what Lovecraft's been up to. He's had a good 100 years. You know, oh, he hasn't written a single woman yet? Okay, that sounds about right. Really? Still? He didn't rename his cat? Okay. Huh, how'd he get in here? But
This work, yeah. But
that is it just crossed my mind. I had to bring it up.
and also I have a particular anxiety of when it comes to writing and being, I guess, insecure about it. I notice I'm kind of apprehensive about taking risks or writing, you know, those kinds of, like, or somehow being mistaken for, okay, this character believes this, then that means the author believes this, because we live in a society where people do that shit. And I've noticed I kind of worry about, you know, like we've talked about this before, if someone in my family or someone I knew, like, picked up and read a book of mine, they noticed, like, oh, these characters did this, or this character had sex, or they drink alcohol, then, oh, Maureen, you're so morally bankrupt, or, oh, is this about me, is this about, you know, and that kind of always worries me, and that always makes me kind of insecure, and I...
See, for me, that's the hardest thing. Yeah. If somebody just doesn't like my book, I can deal with that.
Yeah.
Because I can accept, like, I have very, very, very limited capabilities. Like, for all the writers I diss all the time, I think I'm worse than them. I'm studying from their failures. But I worry that people think less of me as a person.
Yeah, and because the last thing I want to do is just, like, you know, upset someone I know, and that's, again, part of the reason why I lead such a double life with writing sometimes, because I'm just like, well, I don't want them to, like, read something and be like, oh, you're this way, or even just some of the stuff I do is just kind of out there and kind of, like, obscure, and, like, especially this one story I just sent off recently published is very different than another story I just recently had published. Like, this, it's different stylistically, it's an experiment, and I think people are going to think, oh, she's really weird for that, and I'm like, why am I still at the age of 25 in high school and care about what people think of me so much, even though I don't know. But,
see, it's very interesting, our dynamic, just because we're like polar opposites, literally, in that regard. I think a big thing for me was, you know, in high school I got a lot of shit for it, and a lot of people said I was going to go to hell and made fun of me for it. There were some cool people too. This was not wholly negative. I actually went to a really good high school with great teachers, and a really good, especially my graduating class was like 3/4 really awesome people. Some awesome people were also doing this, and even the people I didn't get along with were, for the most part, very good kids from good families. But that was a big thing. It was almost this anti-intellectual thing with writing books, especially kind of genre stuff or weird out there shit, or being into stuff like I was like Marilyn Manson or something. So I got a lot of flack for it, and I just didn't care. I think because to me being fake was a worse punishment than being tormented or made fun of. I'd rather get mocked than be something that I wasn't. It just was not in my nature. And people, usually younger, what do you call them, younger classmen? Underclassmen, would like talk to me like, hey, I really like how you're this way even though you get shit. And it's like, you like that I'm being a jerk even though people call me out on it? No, that was partially true, yes. In many cases, that was definitely the case. But that really kind of stuck with me, because for everything I do that's crazy or controversial, I think, there's probably like 100 people I know that want to stand up for this or want to be this way, but are too afraid to, or just don't have, not that they're cowards, but they don't have the capability to. They may lose their job, they may lose their marriage or their family. And I don't really care. Like, I always say this, I lost my life. My life's done. Before Long Shot Books began, my life ended. I got nothing to lose. You know, I could put out a crazy book and still go on dates. I can still work and do Long Shot Books. There's zero risk for me at this point in my life.
Yeah, and again, we're polar opposites, because I'm more worried, I guess, of being rejected on a personal level based on the things I write. And I'm always, even just my personality, I'm like, I don't want to offend people. I'm just going to keep this to myself, like, water it down, like, don't even, be this way. And I'm like, is my art suffering as a result? Probably, because sometimes I just want to write, like, this, crazy story, but not, like, bad crazy, but just, like, over the top, like, weird crazy and all that kind of stuff. So it's just severely limits, like, I'm limiting my own abilities by doing this. It's making me feel even more insecure, and I guess I'm just worried about being rejected as a person.
Oh, I got
based
two
on my
things.
writing.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's all?
Yeah.
Okay. So two things. The first is I always think of with wanting to write crazy stuff. I mean, there's stuff, I talk about this all the time, but I kill a character I've written since 2011, this past year in a book I wrote. So that's been 7 years writing the character? 8?
Yeah.
We'll say 7 because it was very, very early stages. And so I did that, and that sucked. I didn't want to do it. I tried not to. But how it is for me with writing is you just know what the truth is in your head. You know what the vision is, I think, very often. And I just listened to that. Clive Barker has a quote where he says that he's more of a journalist than a writer, where he sees things in his head and he just transcribes what he's seeing, what plays out, which I'm going to go back into later, actually, probably, if we have the opportunity. And that's very much how I do it. And that's how I get over, like, if I have anxiety, or even writer's block on my level. I have hundreds and hundreds of ideas, not all good ideas. I definitely won't do 1/10 of them. But there's never a shortage of ideas or even knowing where I want the story to go. I usually always know, just by the second I have a concept, I have a structure. It's a mental illness is how I describe it, because that's what I think it's a symptom of OCD personally. But I never don't know where I'm going, but I'm not sure of how best to communicate that idea. That's the difficulty, in my opinion. And there's a quote in Young Adulter about being you're hearing the song of God, but you're an instrument out of tune. And I guess that's very much my anxiety. And that's where I just have to talk to myself and be like, okay, what would this character do in this situation? What would that character how would they react? What would happen after? Like, logic is literally almost a math equation for me in my head. It's just pure structuralism and logic. And trying to make that as entertaining and connecting with as many people as I can within that motion. So I'm going to bring that up with the Clive Barker and what he says, because I have to mention him at least once an episode. That was one of my conditions for filming this series.
It's true. It's in your contract.
I don't have to mention him. I get to mention him at least once an episode. And that's where I draw from. That's why I grew up on Stephen King and Clive Barker. But how do you feel then about getting rejection notices?
Ooh.
Putting so much stock in, other people's approval.
Well, this is something I've been kind of like struggling with right now, because I have been sending stories and stuff, and
I got your submission.
Yeah.
I rejected.
Yeah, you
from
rejected
your own publisher.
He was just like, no, like, this is garbage. No, but I even sent him a draft, and he's like, I refuse to read this. But no, I have taken my rejection letters and just put them on my wall. I'm like, I'm going to wallpaper my home in rejection letters. But I think my biggest issue, I tend to take rejection personally, like very, very personally, like more personally than people probably should. And I know that because I have this tendency, I guess, like someone I used to work with brought this up to me, but they said, you put yourself into everything that you do, and when you get rejected, it pretty much seems like they're rejecting you as a person, not what you've done or this piece of work or whatever. Like, saying, if someone says, like, at this point in my life, there was a time I was so sensitive about it. When someone would say, oh, I don't like that sentence, or I don't like this, I automatically thought, like, they don't like me as a person. Oh my gosh, like, I'm this horrible, like, I need to apologize for just being me, or I need to apologize for my existence and stuff like that. I just got so insecure about it. And now I'm like, well, maybe this publisher isn't the right fit. Maybe I didn't read all of the guidelines when I submitted. Maybe I didn't follow directions. Maybe there's a lot of things I didn't do, or maybe the piece just isn't what they're looking for. I didn't fit whatever grand scheme of things that they're trying to do. And that's fine, and I'll just keep going, keep trying until I find someone that will accept my story, and that's fine. And it's not anything against me. They don't know me personally, so they can't. Who are they to reject me as a person? But it is hard. It's a constant battle, and I don't think I'll ever entirely be over it. I don't think I'll ever entirely like make peace with it. But I just do have to remind myself, okay, this story could be the, there's this one quote, I can't remember who says it, but it's basically, you could be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, but there's still gonna be someone out there who does not like peaches. You could write the best story, the most masterfully written book in the entire world, but there's just still gonna be people who hate it. And there's still gonna be people who just don't agree with it, don't like it, don't care for the author or whatever. They don't care for me, and that's just how it's gonna be. And I'm still struggling with that. Okay, I want to be another insecurity of mine. I'm like, okay, I just want to be liked. I want this, I don't want friction. I don't like it. I feel uncomfortable when people dislike me. And then I'm like, that's just gonna happen whether or not I know about it. So I just try to make my peace from there.
Just to let you and more so the viewers know, if anybody's actually watching this, I wasn't like smiling because I was laughing at what you're saying. I was smiling because I had to like make an abrupt stop, and I was thinking like, people are gonna be watching like, what is he doing? It's like in a movie where they're going like this on the steering wheel, and you see everything. It's like Annie Hall, this scene with Christopher Walken when he's driving right before he tells Woody Allen he thinks about driving into opposing traffic.
This is all green screen right now. We're actually in a studio.
One point I wanted to bring up in this video was a lot of writers, and I perpetuate this too. I just did this in a recent article I posted on the site, and I can see the hypocrisy of this. Stephen King says in order to be a true writer, that's not verbatim, that you should read 4 hours a day and write 4 hours a day. I think Clive Barker says you should be writing every day like it's your job. A lot of writers hold this philosophy. Those are the specific examples I know. I think Barker does about 2,000 2,000 pages before he sits up from dinner. Ray Bradbury, he'd write, I think, either a chapter or a short story every day before he would get up for the day. And that's one thing also, the stress of life, that I want to introduce in this video, that he would do that so he'd be fresh-minded. And I think there's something to that. I definitely see how even though you're tired, you can wake up just good to go. Because if I have a bad day at work, I'm not writing.
Yeah.
If I get a bad call, I'm not writing. But if I just wake up, it's possible. However, how do you feel about people, or that belief system? I'll just put it that, not the people themselves, but the notion that you got to write every day to be a writer, that you have to read every day to be a writer.
See, as somebody who doesn't do it at all, like not every day, I can honestly say I've been on the fence about this for a long time. I've known people who read a short story a day challenge or write a short story a day challenge and stuff like that, and I think those can be good for fun, especially National Novel Writing Month is
NaNoWriMo.
Yeah, and a lot of people say that's really fun to participate in. I had a friend who just recently wrote a screenplay in 20 days, and she's just always writing. She just is like a powerhouse. But personally, I don't know if it's healthy to do it every day. I once had a professor in school who had us write 10 minutes a day every day, at least 10 minutes a day every day for 6 to 7 days a week. I'm like, that's something, and that's a practice I upheld for a very long time, and a lot of things that I very much enjoyed it came from that practice, and that's a practice I would like to get into again. But sometimes when you're just not mentally there, or you just are like, I'd rather just not write anything than write garbage, or just take a break. I can't honestly say I entirely support the notion of you have to write every single day, because there are days where I feel so dull and uninspired that I just I'm literally writing, why am I doing this, and why am I doing this to myself? And then you just get kind of angry and frustrated, and then it just feeds into my insecurity of I'm a bad writer and this isn't healthy. But
it's like Amadeus.
But that's just the way I see it. I guess I would say it's not advisable. If it works for you, then go for it. But if you need a break, then don't feel obligated to have to keep going. When you if you're running, and you're probably going to pass out, you should probably stop running before you pass out.
I have kind of I don't know if it's controversial, but a bit of a wacky perspective on this one. I actually think it's what you could consider classist. And here's my reasoning why. I think, like, for Stephen King to read and write 4 hours a day each, he doesn't have to work, 8 to 10 hours, 12-hour shifts, and he can still spend time with his family. And I think it's very elitist. I think it's very, kind of snobbish, to be honest. Because, like, I've had days where I came home from work and I just passed out because I was so exhausted. I used to have to take sleep medication because I was in such physical pain after every shift. And then you got family stuff going on. You got people dying, people being born, all that stuff. And I'm not saying he meant it that. I'm not saying... I actually do think Stephen King's very classist. I do think he hates poor people, actually, but for just a medley of reasons, not just this. I just don't think it's feasible. And like you said, I think you got to take your mental health into account. I think, I do get it because, like, we always say, like, oh, your book, that's like your child. Well, you don't get to just stop being a parent because you had a bad day, and I understand that. And I always say it's like exercise, and I've never exercised and regretted it afterwards, but I've had a lot of days where I didn't, and at the end of the day I was like, I should have just done that. I should have just ran or done my thing. And same with writing. I've never regretted writing, but I've regretted not writing quite a few times.
No, I can see that.
But I think you definitely, you need rest days. Everybody needs a break. And I've also never regretted taking time off when I needed it, on that note, now that I think about it. There's been times I take 6 months off after I start writing a book just to get myself in order so I can focus and dedicate myself to the book like I need to, rather than writing slavishly just to write for some arbitrary deadline I've set for myself. If you got a contract or something pre-manuscript, that's kind of different. Then you're in trouble. But generally speaking, I think it's best just to take the time for yourself, even though I am an advocate for writing as much as you can.
No, I agree. And I guess I'm gonna sort of change gears a little bit, but I guess this is sort of going back to our initial question about being anxious and getting started. At least for me, I totally just realized this, but I can be a perfectionist, and I'm sure I can't name a single person I know who isn't one, to some degree, but I guess my question to you is, are you a perfectionist, and how do you deal with that in your writing, and how do you cope with the need to be perfect, and how do you find, like, balance in saying when you're working on something to finally say that you're done with the piece, you're done with your book, you're done with your story, you're done with your poem or whatever?
Oh, this is another thing Clive Barker said. He said that you could, he'll be working on a painting or a book for years and years, and then you work on it, and then after a certain point, you're basically damaging your own art by over-producing it and over-revising it. And you have to just know when to step away, and it's the best that you did. And generally, that's how I am. With a lot of my books, they go through 5 drafts, usually the last 2 or 3 being with other readers or editors, depending on, usually an editor who's worked professionally as an editor to some degree, and a few test readers who are just readers. But my last book, for instance, was really a step out of my comfort zone because I published like a day or 2 after I finished it. And my main inspiration was the end of The Sopranos. There's a review that said, just cutting to black on Tony's face was David Chase, the showrunner and creator of Sopranos. That was his equivalent of smashing a guitar at the end of a concert. And that's kind of how I felt about it. Like, it was very much like the album and band Rites of Spring. How it's like, the production's not the smoothest. It's not the most melodic voice or whatever. It's just the creation in that manner of releasing it was part of the art itself, or the artistic experience for me. And I think that's when I stopped, is when I realized the artistic experience is over. Alejandro Jodorowsky talks about that, how the creation process of art is more important than the art itself in many cases. And that's how I feel too. And I got that from filmmaking. Even though writing a book isn't making a film, and they're incredibly different in many ways, I think the experience can sometimes be the same kind of journey. What about you?
Well, I'm an insane perfectionist, again, like insecure perfectionist and fear of rejection and stuff, but I guess for me, just trying to challenge that notion of what is, like, perfection, like what would be the perfect book that I could write, like what would I say would be my most perfect piece? Like, when I'm starting on a project, how could this be, like, over the top, like, everything I absolutely want? And then I'm like, what's my standard of being done? What's my standard of writing a good book? And I try to, like, I guess, I want to say, like, act accordingly, but just sort of saying, for me, it ties into that, like, fear of rejection. Like, is my work perfect because other people accept it, or it's because I've done everything I've set out to do? And I think just trying to redefine, like, what perfect is, or what, like, doable is for me, instead shifting on away from what do people approve of, what will people like, what will, will they prefer, I guess, into, did I accomplish everything I wanted to? And did I do it, with integrity? Did I do it, the way I feel like it should be done? And I guess that's kind of deconstructing that idea of perfection for me. And as far as, like, at what point I'm done, I'm just like, okay, I've said everything I have left to say. I really don't know what else I can do. And then I just keep wanting to tweak stuff and change stuff, and then at some point you just have to say, I gotta stop. And I think that's usually my end part. That's usually how I finish.
There's some deer up here.
Nice.
That's interesting. Maybe they'll see it in the rear view when I turn around.
Yeah. But
Well, it reminds me of a quote by John Cusack about editing and directors, where he said that he said films are basically made in editing, but he said really the best directors are the ones who have a vision and they try to stick with it the whole way through the filming process. And of course, there's going to be wrenches thrown in your system, even in your own head. Even when you're writing a book, you're going to be like, oh, I didn't expect this character to go that way. In Veronica Mars, one of the main characters, Logan Echolls, was originally introduced as a villain. And he was, the actor was he had so much charisma, and he had so much range that they just eventually wound up making him a protagonist lead. A flawed one, but it's interesting how those things can just develop without you even realizing it. But I think I try to keep that initial kernel as much, like, in the mood. Like I said, I see a lot of writing or projects as like an album, and I try to keep that general flow the same as I would expect from some kind of album as a listening experience, which is an abstract way to view it, but that's what gets me through the project.
So I guess my last question to sort of take us across the finishing line and close us out would be, what helps you finally finish that project? Like, what gets you from start to the end, and, like, what keeps you motivated to just keep going despite despite the performance anxiety, despite the insecurity, despite the, days of feeling dull and uninspired and having bad days? Like, how do you, like, what prevents you from just giving up?
I just don't. Yeah. I mean, it's that simple. I just don't do that. Yeah. And I think someone's proving it to myself that I can do it. I think the challenge of it's always good to try new things with each book. What's hard for me is not to rush it sometimes, especially in editing. I'm really reductionist. I'm constantly my books are usually half of what I have outlined for them, where there's character arcs and stuff. There's supposed to be like 3 or 4 chapters that I'm like, why would I do that when I could do this in a sentence? I think if I could do this in a sentence, why do it in 3 or 4 chapters? So the word count's much lower than originally intended for many of them. But what I try to keep in mind always is that every scene, every word is building towards a bigger picture. So if I want to write that huge payoff at the end of the book, the climax, the showstopper, whatever, I have to build up to it, because without that suspense developing, there is no payoff. So that's what keeps me patient, is what I have issue with, is not finishing it, so to speak. Yeah. I want to rush across the finish line to take shortcuts, and I have to stop myself from doing so. What about you?
I think for me, it's more about, I'm going to say, a romance, like falling in love with the idea that you're working on, and I guess for me personally, not being a slut for other projects and actually just committing to one and finishing it and seeing it through. But I'd say just really believing in whatever idea I'm doing, and that whole nothing's worse than the untold story inside of you. I know it sounds like corny and stuff, but writing the kind of story that you want to read, and telling the story the way only you can, and not in like an egotistical way. Even though I know, was it Mark Twain that said, or someone said that you cannot create, only plagiarize. And I mean, if I am like just telling the same story over again, just telling it my way, and just being okay with that, and again, just embracing the idea for what it is.
I'm glad you brought up like the idea of falling in love with a book, because I do think the greatest fear for me, other than being like worthless, I put my whole self-value in each of my books, which probably isn't healthy, I'm not advocating, is that the idea of a book you fall in love with and it's perfect in your head. It never turns out that way. I've had books turn out better, I think. I mean, not even books, but the scenes we filmed in a movie where an actor's better. I'll put it that way. I'm not going to put it on myself and say, oh, I nailed it. But I've seen other people really bring something to life that we originally envisioned with Renaissance Men in ways that was better than we ever could have imagined, or something works that you never thought would. And I think the biggest fear is, it's like dating someone and getting to know them and having this perfect idea of a human being. And nobody's perfect. Everybody's sloppy, everybody has faults, just like every project that I've ever seen, not worked on, but ever seen, is going to have faults and, ugly parts of their character. But it's trying to stay true to whatever attracted you to them in the first place, I think. So the complications at the end are just, I don't know, worth it.
Take us across, unless you have anything else you want to add or say.
Not that I can think of. I was just asking myself that in my head, but I think that's all. I think we got it covered.
All right, then let's take us across the finish line of this video in the corniest way possible and say thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do whatever you do on YouTube.
Comment how you get over writer's block. What gets you across the finish line?
And